Hello, my name is Maddie Ennis, and today we're going to be looking at behavior management and social skills that are required to be taught in classrooms today. We will be referring to the text How to Reach and Teach Children with Challenging Behavior by K. L. Oten and Jody L. Tuttle. So first we're going to talk about some of the factors of the problem. First of all, the number of students with behavior challenges has increased dramatically within the past decade. So educators have become overwhelmed with the challenging behaviors they face in their classrooms. Secondly, many educators have taken to the belief that dealing with problem behavior is not their responsibility. They simply feel that their job is to teach academics and not behavior skills. And lastly, punitive approaches work for 80 to 90% of the student population as controlling behavior. The problem with this, though, is that they do not develop personal responsibility, teach life skills, or most importantly, do not work for students with chronic behavior challenges. So, to define positive behavior support, we refer to the definition that it's an application of a behaviorally based system approach to enhance the capacity of schools, families, and communities to design effective environments that improve the link between research-validated practices and the environments in which teaching and learning occurs. So positive behavior support is an important aspect of a functional behavior assessment. The two go hand in hand, and one cannot happen without the other. There's a great deal of research behind positive behavior support. There's over 30 years of research that have gone into this, and some of the different types of research has been through the work of various antecedent and consequences strategies, along with data collecting, graphing, monitoring, and most importantly, through the traditional gold standard of quantitative experimental research. This book provides us with a helpful model to represent how students can receive intervention and help at various levels. So they provide us with a system, which we'll look at in a second, that's 3 different models, and it's important to remember that students receive intervention on all 3 levels, and it's a model that works exponentially, meaning from the ground up, so from our bottom level all the way up to the top. And when interventions are set in place at all levels, behavior challenges can be dealt with more effectively and efficiently, which is what we're striving for as educators. So you'll see that at the bottom we have all of our students. This is 80 to 90% of students, and this includes students without serious behavior problems. Secondly, we have some, which includes our at-risk students for behavior, and this is made up of 5 to 15% of students. And lastly, we have our few tier, which is only 1 to 7%, but this is our students with chronic or intense problem behavior. And these are the students that are going to need a functional behavior assessment. So, a functional behavior assessment, which can be shortened to an FBA, examines why problem behavior occurs in order to guide prevention and intervention efforts, thereby increasing efficiency and effectiveness. like I said, FBAs are intended for those students in the 1 to 7% range at the top of our model. So there's 3 key concepts of an FBA. First is the setting events. This is not to be confused with the time or place, but rather it's the events that increase the likelihood of a problem behavior to occur. So a good way to identify this when working with a student is to finish the sentence, "You know it's going to be a bad day when," and then fill in the blank for that specific student. So, for example, "You know it's going to be a bad day when there is a test," or perhaps Mondays are particularly challenging for a student. Second, we have our triggering antecedents. This is an external or internal event that sets a child off into his or her problem behavior. So this is trying to pinpoint what it is that will set a child off, and they'll start acting out and showing behavior problems. And lastly, we have our maintaining consequences. And this is what occurs after the problem behavior that contributes to its occurrence and maintenance. An FBA evaluation. So, a functional behavior assessment is one of the most important components in an effective plan to help students with challenging behavior. To really intervene and help a student, it's extremely important that an FBA is taken seriously and is specific to each student that is receiving help in their behavior. So there's 8 sections to an FBA, and we're just going to walk through them quickly. So first, section 1 is identifying student information and sources of data. This is where you just collect the necessary information such as the student's name, grade, and who all is involved in the FBA. Second is describing the problem behavior. The most important thing about this section is to be specific. This is the data that's collected about what it is exactly that the student, where he or she is having trouble and when and what is happening. Third, we have our triggers and antecedents. This section identifies what it is that sets a student off into his or her problem behavior. Section 4 is consequences. This is what happens after the behavior occurs. Section 5 is our plan and strategies, and this is where strategies are listed that are going to be set in place to help stop the problem behavior. Section 6 is student input. This is where the student gets to voice his or her thoughts, and it's important to listen to what they have to say to gain more insight into why something may be occurring, and this is where we note whether or not the student was interviewed and what he or she said. Next we have other, and this is where we can note our students' current strengths and weaknesses and anything else that may apply that was not mentioned in our previous sections. And lastly, we have section 8, which is our summary or hypothesis statement. And this is where the team will collectively come to a conclusion about the behavior and the plans that are going to be set into place. Next, we have our common functions of problem behavior. So these are some reasons why a student may be acting a certain way. So to list a couple of them, we have to get attention, to gain something tangible, to get power or control, to meet a sensory need, to communicate feelings, wants, and needs as a result of lack of understanding, and to escape or avoid something. These are 7 of the most common reasons, but there may also be other reasons. It just depends on the student. But this is helpful to gain insight to understand why a student may be acting out. The bottom line of an FBA, something to keep in mind that's extremely important when working with students with challenging behavior, is that behavior is rarely behavior, meaning that many times there may be a biological or emotional need that underlies the behavior that the student does not know how to express appropriately. So it's important to remember this when students may be acting out, and just keep in mind that they may not simply be trying to cause problems, but that there may be confusion in how to express an emotion or something else going on other than just causing problems within a class. Next, we have our model of intervention. So once the functions of problem behaviors are identified, educators need to design an intervention that encourages students to meet the function in a more socially acceptable way. So our book has created another model to represent how we can go about this as educators. So we first have instruction, and then prevention, and reinforcement, and lastly, the undesirable consequences. So this is another helpful tool for teachers to use. So lastly, to conclude about behavior management in the classroom, through my study, just in this short chapter, I've learned that teaching students with challenging behavior can be difficult and at times frustrating. But the answer is not simply to ignore these students or dismiss their behavior. Rather, part of a teacher's job is to teach appropriate behavior skills and attempt to correct any inappropriate behavior a student may be displaying. There's been a great deal of research done on exactly how to intervene so that students can be helped most effectively and efficiently. As a future teacher, I want to know my resources and know how to help my students. Although it may be trying and not always easy, I plan to use what I have learned in my future classroom and continue to seek assistance from others so that my students can reach their full potential. Now we're moving on to the social skills part of our project. For this section, I chose a book, I Like Me by Nancy Carlson, and this book represents a lesson on self-acceptance. So from the character count standards, this would be located under the social and emotional domain, specifically under section 1.4. Here we have another 3-tiered model, which represents social skills instruction. At the bottom, we'll find all of our students, which is when we teach a lesson about social skills that can be taught to an entire class or school, and every single student is involved. Second, we have some, which is our small group social skills instructions. And lastly, we have our few section, which is individual social skills instruction. So for my project specifically, I'm talking about self-acceptance, and one two ways that the problem of self-acceptance can negatively affect others are, first, that having a negative view of yourself can often lead to others having a negative view of you as well. So when you don't give yourself the value you deserve, that can often affect how those around you view and treat you as well. And also, a negative view of yourself can lead to self-destruction. When you aren't accepting of the person that you are, it's easy to want to change who that person is, and sometimes this can become dangerous. So, the objective of this lesson for my students is that they can learn to master self-acceptance in their own lives. So, this I found has been increasingly challenging for students today, especially in our culture with media and all these different sources that are telling them who they are and what they should look like. It's easy to not accept the person that they are. So the goal of this lesson is that students will understand that everyone is different and that they should like who they are and not want to be someone else. Two key terms that I'd like students to take away from this lesson are peer pressure and unique. So, students often are faced with the pressures of peers to change into someone they are not and don't want to be. My goal for this lesson is for students to learn to say no to peer pressure when necessary. So simply because everyone else is acting or looking a certain way doesn't mean that that's how that student needs to act or look. Second, I want them to understand that everyone is unique and no two people are exactly the same, and that's a good thing, and that you should be happy to be different and unique. So now I'm going to read the story I Like Me by Nancy Carlson. I Like Me by Nancy Carlson. I have a best friend. That best friend is me. I do fun things with me. I draw beautiful pictures. I ride fast. And I read good books with me. I like to take care of me. I brush my teeth. I keep clean and I eat good food. When I get up in the morning, I say, "Hi, good looking." I like my curly tail, my round tummy, and my tiny little feet. When I feel bad, I cheer myself up. When I fall down, I pick myself up. When I make mistakes, I try and try again. No matter where I go or what I do, I'll always be me, and I like that. The end. So, after reading this story, I created a worksheet for my students which asks them a few questions, all related to self-acceptance. So the first one is to list three things that the character in our story likes about herself. Second, they're going to list 3 things the character in our story likes to do. And lastly, they're going to they're going to answer the question, how does the character in our story display self-acceptance? So what I want the students to take away from this lesson is the concept of self-acceptance. And I feel that I'll know that they understand this mostly from their actions after the lesson. So these behaviors and actions will most likely be positive and uplifting, and they embrace differences and are accepting of personal traits and characteristics. After reading this story, I created a worksheet for my students which asks them a few questions. One way that students are going to related to independently practice. So the first one, what they learned from this lesson, list 3 things that the character in our story likes about herself. So they're going to be provided. Second, they're going to list 3 things the character in our story likes to do. They can write in. And lastly, they're going to list the one that we read, but will be applicable to their own. They're going to answer the question, how does the character in our story and what they like about themselves acceptance? So what I want the students to take away from this lesson is, with my students, it's my hope that the students learn to love themselves for exactly who they are. And I feel that I want them to understand that not everyone has to look or act a certain way simply from their actions. That's what our culture tells the lesson. Students should accept who they are, how they look, and actions, the things will most likely be positive and uplifting, and they embrace differences and are accepting of personal traits and characteristics. One way that students are going to independently practice what they learned from this lesson is they're going to create their own I Like Me books. So they're going to be provided with a book that they can write in that is similar to the one that we read, but will be applicable to their own life and what they like to do and what they like about themselves. So in doing this project with my students, it's my hope that the students learn to love themselves for exactly who they are. I want them to understand that not everyone has to look or act a certain way simply because that's what our culture tells us. Students should accept who they are, how they look, and the things that make them different from other students in the class. Thank you.